Back on HQ Spotlight, some of the biggest college football matchups with 2 weeks to go in the regular season. A couple of top 20 matchups, and both of them have double-digit, close to 2-touchdown spreads. Ohio State minus 12.5 at home against unbeaten Indiana. Notre Dame at Yankee Stadium, a 14.5-point favorite against Army. If Army somehow wins that game, look out. Things could get crazy, even crazier in the college football playoff discussion. It is time to go overrated, underrated with some of the teams that either deserve or do not deserve their ranking as we inch closer to the college football playoff. We'll do this each and every Thursday here on HQ. I'm now joined by three national champions. We have Danny Kanell here, who won a national championship, what was that, 45 years ago with Florida State. Cardale, it's been 10 years. Damien, 9 years for your two. Let's start you off with Cardale's Ohio State Buckeyes, number 2, the big game of the weekend at home against Indiana. Cardale, how would you rate them right now at number 2? Overrated, underrated, fairly rated?
You know, I think they're right where they need to be, fairly rated. They have improved ever since that one loss to Oregon out in Eugene. You look at the things they have to deal with at the offensive line and shuffling guys around, and also hit with another injury this past week, and still able to manufacture some type of run game to keep defenses honest, because we all know about the playmakers they have on the outside. So I think they're right where they deservedly need to be. But this would be a huge test for them. This Indiana team is hot.
Well, listen, before I give my thoughts, you mentioned there's 3 national champions, but only one of us has a birthday today. So shout out to Mr. Danny Kanell. Happy birthday, old man. I hope it is the best. Listen, I was going to sing to you, but they told us we didn't have enough time. But my man, happy birthday, another year of life and blessings to you. But yeah, but to follow up, Cardale, I agree. I think Ohio State is fairly rated. I think they're right where they need to be. I would borderline call them overrated, but when you look at the skill that they have, guys like Jeremiah Smith, Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, like at times they have not played up to the level of talent that they had, but you cannot deny what they have in the skill position, what they have in quarterback, what they have on the defensive side of the ball, guys like Caleb Downs. So even when they're not playing their best, they still have the talent to outmatch almost anybody. I mean, hell, that's what they paid all that money for that roster for. So I would say they're right where they need to be. Cardale was right. This weekend is going to be a huge test against Indiana, but we'll see how they look after this game.
Did I see somebody change their answer on the rundown? Because I thought Damien was saying overrated. I was ready for him to go in on the Buckeyes. So sounds like he's a little.
Hold on. Like I said, they don't play to the standard.
All right, so I kind of went off script too, and we used to do this on the radio show I used to do, overrated, underrated, or properly rated. I'll say they're properly rated. They are almost a 2-touchdown favorite against a top 5 team in Indiana, who's a really good football team. If there was a rematch with the Oregon Ducks neutral site, they'd be a favorite again. They were a favorite the last time. I know they lost, but I think they're a team that is right where they kind of need to be. They're in a sweet spot. They're playing at home. They should advance. If the odds makers are right, they're a national championship contender. Will Howard was really the only question mark on this super roster. How would he respond, going under the pressure of being the Ohio State Buckeyes quarterback? And when he, had that moment at the end of the Ducks game, which cost him by sliding, a little bit too late, not realizing the clock was there, what'd he do? He bounced right back. I think he stepped up in the leadership role. So I think Ohio State, as a national championship contender, is properly rated.
You know what I haven't heard? We've talked so much about, like, if Indiana gets blown out, are they out at 11-1? What if Ohio State loses?
We haven't heard that.
And they have 2 losses. Let's move on to Indiana, though. They're number 5. Big underdogs in this game, Danny. Undefeated, but ranked behind some teams that have suffered some losses.
So I still think they're underrated. I know they're finally getting the ranking that they deserve, but I look at the point spread too, and I just think this is one where odds makers don't give them much of a chance. And this is a really, really good football team. And I hate the way that there are critics of this team. I feel like they should be America's team. Like, everyone usually likes an underdog story. And yet, because of the debates we get into, there's people that want to see this Indiana team get smacked down and humbled and kicked out of the party, not to have another opportunity. But they've got a great quarterback in Curtis Rourke. They have one of the more underrated wide receiving cores across the country. And their defense, while they might not be full of a bunch of NFL first and second round draft picks, they've got a bunch of experience that they brought in from James Madison. 5 players transferred in with Kirk Cignetti from that school. They've been playing great football. They're both top 15 in total offense and total defense. They're good on both sides of the ball. I still think they're underrated as far as how seriously people are taking this team.
Yeah, I agree with Danny. I think they're underrated as well, far as the national respect that national lack of respect. Let's say for a team that's 10-0 and that's taking care of business, we can talk about their schedule all we want, but they take care of business. And you look at their schedule, you look at matchups versus Northwestern and Nebraska, and you try to match them up and see how other teams performed against them. Well, those were two teams that Ohio State didn't look their greatest. Actually, Nebraska almost had an opportunity to beat Ohio State in Columbus and started off slow last week versus Northwestern in Chicago at Wrigley Field. But Indiana, they handled those two teams convincingly and continue to keep the momentum up. And, I think they have the coach of the year, in my opinion, when it comes to the way he has developed and changed his culture and brought in all the right pieces to get them on this national level. But I still think they're a little bit underrated as far as the lack of respect they're getting when it comes to everyone involved in making these decisions.
Listen, guys, I love Curt Cignetti. I love Curtis Roy, but this team is overrated. I mean, I'm one of those guys that looks at their schedule and thinks that it's not good enough. And then I look especially at the Michigan matchup where they were 2-touchdown favorites, and they barely escaped out of there with a win. So I think they're moving in the right direction. I think they're building the right culture. I think that, outside of Curtis Rourke and, this receiving core, they're not the most talented team. They don't have any guys that jump off like this is going to be a highly draftable guy, but they are doing things the right way. I just don't think when they get into these big moments, like I think one of the biggest fears for a lot of people is, well, what if they get steamrolled against Ohio State? And I have that same question. I have that same fear. Not only in that game, but once you get to the 12-team playoff and you're playing against these teams who have better schedules, have better wins, have been through more, I think it might show that we've overhyped this team just a little bit. Yeah, but not to take away from anything they've done.
Yeah, she hates them.
She was on CBS Sports HQ earlier, and she said if they lose by more than 20, that it's about a 50-50 chance Indiana makes the college football playoff. If they keep it within 7, sitting pretty good as long as they take care of business in their final game. Let's move on to the Miami Hurricanes. And Damien, Hurricane fans are upset because they were sitting there idle last week while your Crimson Tide went out and played Mercer, and then you jump Miami in the college football playoff rankings. Is Miami overrated or underrated?
I actually did a little social media clip the other day, and I said that I didn't think that Miami could win a national championship. Now, I do still feel that way. I think the defensive side of the ball is the reason that they can't. I think that's what's going to hold them back. But I think even I and other people are forgetting how good Cam Ward in this offense can be. Yes, defensively, they can't stop a nosebleed, but when Cam Ward is hot, this is one of the best and most explosive offenses in the country. So I think that we're starting to underrate this team as far as how talented they are and how they do have the ability to score with anybody. I still think that defense is going to cause them some problems, but I definitely think that teams in the 12-team playoff or whoever they face in the ACC championship should definitely still respect this Miami team because, like I said, when Cam Ward is hot, they're one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah, I agree with you, Damien, but you mentioned one side of the ball and honestly one player. I think this team is overrated because, when you look at the top 4, in particular, the top 5 teams in the country, I think these guys have the real opportunity to win a national title. The 12 team is great. Everybody get the opportunity, but when we look down to it, it's going to be 5 to 6 teams that we say they're going to be the national champs, right? And I don't think Miami is one of those teams just because you look at those other 5 to 6 teams, and I can mention them, Ohio State, Georgia, even Alabama in there, Texas, and Ole Miss, who was my dark horse from the beginning of the season. They are complete teams, not just great offenses or great quarterbacks, but they play really good defense as well. And Miami don't. I mean, outside of that one loss, you look at some of their games going out to Cal and a few other ones, Virginia Tech, those are easily games they should lost. So and also on that defensive side of the ball, they just been struggling. Can't stop anyone in the second half of these games, let alone in the fourth quarter. So I think they're overrated.
Oh, Cardale, but they didn't lose those games. Just look, Ohio State didn't lose to Nebraska when they were trailing in the fourth quarter. So I'm not going to penalize them against it. I do think their defense is a liability, but I'm more leaning towards Damien and saying that offense, and more than just Cam Ward, they've got Xavier Restrepo, one of the best receivers in school history at Miami. Damien Martinez is a really physical back in the backfield, and I do think Cam Ward is probably right there with Shedeur Sanders for the top quarterback in the country. So I think they're underrated. I don't think anybody wants to try to stop that offense. Yeah, you can probably score on that defense, but that could be a scary proposition to try to get in a scoring shootout with that team.
All right, let's go to a team now that is in position for a bye out of the group of 5. That's Boise State. And maybe the question, the overrated, underrated question, isn't necessarily the exact ranking of 12, but the fact that they would get a bye out of a non-power conference, Danny.
That's where I draw the line. Like, I think this is an okay team, but like they're extremely overrated if we're going to give them. The group of 5 is a different level. There's Power 4, which is one level of college football, and then there's group of 5, which Boise State is playing against. And I am okay with them getting a spot. I was a champion for UCF and Cincinnati and other group of 5 schools getting an opportunity. Congrats to that 2017 co-national champion UCF Knights, by the way. But I do think Boise should get in, but taking a spot from one of the Power 4 conferences for a first-round bye is going too far and gifting them an added round into the playoff. And if we don't want to see blowouts, we do not want to see them in that quarterfinal round. We'd rather see those matchups in the first round, where I don't even know if Boise State would survive the first round. So I think they are overrated and not worthy of that first-round bye.
As we're talking about where they at right now, that number 12 spot, I think they're right on par for what they want to be rated at. But if we're talking about, the projections of them having a top 4 and having that bye, they're not one of the top 4 teams in the country. A great feel-good story, but we don't want to see that Georgia versus TCU scenario in semifinals again. And I think, Boise State would definitely get boat raced by the top 5-6 teams in the country.
Well, all I'm going to say is Boise State, outside of Ohio State, was the closest to beating the number 1 team in the country. So I don't see how we can sit here. I know they play in a different conference and they haven't played as much consistent competition. But when you look at that game, they pretty much could have beat Oregon in that game early in the season on the road as well. I think what Ashton Jeanty does, what he brings to the table, the fact that he is virtually unstoppable. I mean, you got teams that are putting 8-9 guys in the box just to stop this one guy. Well, his receivers are playing better. His quarterback is playing better. Like, they're sound enough on defense to where I think that they could play with any team in the country in that first round. And I think that if they keep winning, I wouldn't be mad if they got in the top 4. I wouldn't be mad if they got a bye.
Cardale, I know that was it was kind of two different questions, like the number of the ranking as opposed to the bye. And I think Cardale said 12, maybe a little bit underrated. But if you give them the bye, that's a little bit too much. Let's go to a team that they're ranked ahead of. Both teams in the Big 12, BYU and Colorado. Colorado is sitting there at 16, Cardale. The Big 12 favorite right now. Is Coach Prime's team overrated or underrated?
I think that's another 2-part thing, a little bit underrated, because, they're favored to win the Big 12, but in all these college football 12-team bracket rankings, they got them out. They got BYU ultimately representing the Big 12, so basically saying BYU is going to beat them in a college football playoff. Big 12 championship game, and I don't see that happening at all, especially with the outings that BYU have been shown all the way up until this point and losing to Kansas last week. So I think Colorado's a little bit underrated.
I think Colorado is criminally underrated. I mean, they've got 2 of the top 3 players in the country, possibly 2 of the top 3 picks in the NFL draft. Shedeur Sanders has played like the best quarterback in the country all season long. Travis Hunter, we know what he brings to the table. We don't even have to discuss that. But when you look at the offensive side of the ball, the offensive line is better. They've got one of the best receiving corps in all of college football. They're able to run the ball better. They're protecting Shedeur better. He was getting sacked almost 5 times a game last season compared to 3 games this season. And the defense is giving up half the points they gave up last year. I think when you look at the superstar level of talent that these guys have, and you mix that with the fact that they are building a real program, they're getting better at the fundamentals, the little details, all the things that take good programs to great programs, they're getting really, really, really good. And I think that they're going to be a team to watch for once they get in the playoffs.
Oh, man, this is the time to sell your Colorado stock. They are overrated. They are the best team, I think, in the Big 12. But the Big 12 is clearly the 4th best Power 4 conference. So I think that bar is pretty separate from the SEC, Big 10, behind the ACC as well, because we're talking about how good they're playing. They still are only a 3-point favorite against the Kansas Jayhawks, who are one of the bottom dwellers in the Big 12. And let's not forget, we mentioned Nebraska before getting beat by Indiana, Ohio State. That Nebraska team smoked Colorado 28-10 earlier this season. So I think they're a little bit overrated when we talk about the national championship picture.
All right, overrated, underrated with our 3 national champs, DK, Damien, and Cardale. Thank you so much for joining us here on HQ Spotlight. You can see a couple of those guys on our Sunday show, along with a couple of our best girls. Mackenzie Brooks, aforementioned, with the Sportsline Simulations. Jordan Giorgio, the host, of course. Saturday, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. They get you ready for kickoff. 3 full hours of greatness with 2 weekends to go in the regular season.